Good evening, everyone. My name's Thalo. Welcome to this free seminar on creating a Twitter bot. First off, I just want to get some little technical things out of the way. So if anyone does already have Python installed, feel free to follow along with Jupyter Notebook. I'm going to go ahead and be using Google Colab, though. So here, let me just put the name of this in the Zoom chat here. There we go. So Google Colab is just a great free online resource that Google offers in order to be able to run the equivalent of Jupyter Notebooks. So these won't actually be running off of your computer. They are actually running on Google's computer somewhere. And once you click on that link, just this first one that comes up when you type in Google Colab, Google Colab is very fancy and used for all kinds of things, but we're just going to be using it to make a Twitter bot. And here we go. Once you do click this link, it should just tell you, hey, do you want to create a new notebook? You'll say, yes, I do want to create a new notebook. And it might take a sec, but then a screen that resembles this one should show up. Here, I just have a very simple line of code running just to hit run and sort of demo how it works. And that everything's running, that I am getting hello world down here with just this very simple Python print statement. As we'll be seeing, Google Colab does allow you to use a whole swath of Python libraries, including Tweepy or Tweepy, I suppose, which is the library that we're going to be using later for actually hooking up our Twitter bot. So first, before we get into it, but before we actually get to making the bot itself, there's just a few little things that we have to know. This is just a free seminar. Welcome to anyone. So we're not assuming that you guys know anything about Python. Here, for anyone just joining, let me go ahead and write the name of the environment I'm using one more time. It's called Google Colab. If you do, just Google that. It should be the first result that pops up. And you can just tell it you would like to create a new notebook. There should be a button that just says new notebook. All right. So there's a couple things we're going to have to know. First, what is a Python list? And what is a Python dictionary? Python just spells these D-I-C-T. So first, a Python list looks something like this. So it has a name. I might call mine a list. And it's a collection of some information in some square brackets. So for example, this might be a perfectly good Python list. I'll just go ahead and ask it to print it out and run it. And here, all right, I have my list of Python objects. These are just numbers. Now that we're seeing what a list looks like, there's just one thing I want to mention what we can do with a list. We should know, how do we access items in a list? So right now there's all 5 of them. And if I want to see all 5 of them, I mean, that's great, right? I can just ask to print out the whole thing. But if you just want to see one item, if I want to isolate just one of these, we're going to use what's called list indexing. We're going to grab these based on their position. So right, there's 5 different items in that list. They're at 5 different positions throughout that list. So it's based on their position, where the first position is 0. So what's that actually going to look like when I access something based on the position 0? Well, I'll say the name of my list, a list. I'll put another pair of brackets here, just a pair of brackets right after the name of the list, and I'll put a number in here. If it's just 0, all right, we just see the 50. But of course, I can make it something else, 0, 1, 2. Here it's 2. Now it is the 70 in that list. So all right, cool. This is just a little bit of background that we're going to have to know. Now, what is a Python dictionary? Here, maybe I'll just do this in a separate cell. If you guys do want to create new cells of code, you can just click this button, or there's also a button right here. There we go. So what is a Python dictionary? Well, much like the last one, let me just show you what one might look like. So here, this is what a Python dictionary might look like, and I'm just going to ask to print it out and hit run. And all right, we see it's a little bit different from just a list. Actually, I kind of want to make it display without calling print. It just displays it in a slightly different way. So this is what a Python dictionary looks like, as opposed to having some square brackets around the edges. It has some curly braces here. And as opposed to just being sort of a list of stuff, here I just had some sort of, I'll call this flat. Just had some flat stuff in a list. Here we have not just things based on their position. We have keys paired with values. So this first key is name, and its corresponding value is John Smith. So this might be a dictionary describing a person. It's a pretty simple dictionary. There's not that much information about this person, but we see what their name is. We also see what their address is. And here I'm contrasting it with my list, which was flat, in that the address has inside of itself another pair of curly braces. And this other pair is actually another dictionary. It's actually a dictionary inside of a dictionary. And inside this dictionary, we have another 2 keys, street and city. And those have some more corresponding values, 21 2nd Street and New York. So all right, cool. Cool. This is what a dictionary looks like. Well, the same question stands, the same question that we asked about this list. How do we access items in a dictionary? This is not going to be based on their positions. So this is just a little bit different from a list. We're going to use dictionary key lookup. We're going to look up values based on their key. So inside this dictionary, I mean, you may notice just immediately the way that it got displayed is not necessarily the way that it got keyed in, right? When I was creating the dictionary, I first wrote the name, and then I wrote the address. And within here, I wrote the city, or sorry, the street, then the city. We're seeing, it just so happens that the address came back to us first, then the name. All of this is just showing us how the order doesn't matter. Dictionaries have no concept of order as opposed to a list. Instead, they have a concept of keys and values. So instead, I might say, hey, what is the name entry in this dictionary? And when I ask to run this, we will see just that name, just John Smith. I could have instead asked for the address, which would have given me another dictionary, right? So this whole thing is the response from asking for the address. And here we have more keys with their corresponding values. So in here, I might also add another pair of brackets and say, okay, within that address, I just want to see the city. Let's see, someone asked, will we get a recording of this webinar? Would like to go through this slowly at my own pace. know this is being recorded. I'm honestly not the person to ask, but I believe you guys should be able to yeah, have access to the recording. I'll post some information about that at the end. All right, thanks. All right. So here, right, I know we are going through this kind of fast, just kind of trying to lay the groundwork in less time than I would usually teach this. But all right, here we're seeing, as opposed to a list that has locations based on where they are, things like 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Inside this dictionary, I have just some entries, name and address, and address has some more entries inside of that, street and city. And all right, cool. Instead of putting locations, by putting these keys inside of here, we can grab the correct value. All right, cool. So this is just a little bit of background that we're going to need. So we're building our way up to our Twitter bot. Now, I want to mention real quick. I want to say I want to describe what an API is. And I want to describe what a JSON blob is. Maybe I should do this in the other order. I think JSON is a little bit easier to describe first. So JSON, first off, yeah, what is JSON? So you guys may have heard this word before, maybe not. It just stands for JavaScript object notation, which is actually a misnomer. I know the word JavaScript is in the name, but in truth, these are language agnostic. They work for whatever computer programming language. It's really just a format for data. It's not associated with JavaScript in any particular way other than its original inception. But really, this is a popular, simple format for sending data around. It's popular in part because of its simplicity, because it is both human readable and convenient for computers. Especially convenient for us just because we're using Python, is that these really look identical to Python dictionaries. And these are a very common format for APIs. APIs are going to be the next thing we talk about. So, all right, that means that this little thing that we saw up here, this really, I mean, I was calling it a Python dictionary, but it just as well could have been a JSON object, or also called a JSON blob. How they got the name blob, I'm not exactly sure. But all right, they look just the same as a Python dictionary. And so here, I know this first one we were looking at was just a very simple dictionary to get us started. But let's just see an example of a more realistic and somewhat complex JSON blob that might be the response we get from an API. So here, this one was pretty simple. I'm going to continue on with this one. And here, I'm going to paste this one in the chat too, so you guys can copy and paste it and follow along in Google Colab as well. Whoops, Zoom is having me send someone a direct message. There we go. All right. So you can grab that from the Zoom chat. You should be able to see just the same thing that I pasted here. I went ahead and called this API response because this is this is resembling, I mean, of course, mine isn't literally from an API. I did not grab this from the web or anything. I just typed it out. But this really is something like what an API might give us. So what are APIs? What are APIs before I dive into this? Before I dive into this slightly more complex looking version of a Python dictionary? All APIs are, well, here first, let me break down the acronym. So it just stands for Application Programmable Interface. And we can just read this name literally. And by that, I just mean, okay, well, there are human interfaces for applications. So Twitter, for example, that's the bot that we're going to be making, at least in this hour. Twitter has a human interface. It has actually several, right? It has a desktop human interface. It has a mobile human interface, right? And on any human interface, or right, also just called user interfaces, we as humans get to sit behind a keyboard and a mouse, or a phone screen, and look at things with our eyes and click around on things and type things into fields. And that type of interface makes a whole lot of sense as a human, as a person. I really wouldn't have it any other way. But when we're talking about making a bot, we're talking about being able to interact with Twitter, not just as a person, but we're talking about being able to program something where that thing will interact with Twitter. We're going to want to be able to program a way for our bot to read tweets. We're going to be able to program a way for our bot to write tweets. And the way that we'll do this programmatically is not the same as the way that we would do this if we ourselves were interacting with the website, typing things in and clicking around and viewing things with our eyes. So that's really all we mean by an application programmable interface, an interface that instead of being human friendly is programmer friendly, friendly for some software that we write, some piece of code that we write. I'll just write it this way. It's essentially a website, not necessarily a website, though often a website, and for us, this will be a website. A website or just other interface, specially designed for accessing, not through your mouse and keyboard, but through a program, through something that we write as code. So this is really all we mean by an API. And JSON just so happens to be a very common format for an API to give us back. Here, I just have an example of, I did not literally grab this from an API, but there are APIs that give you responses that look a whole lot like this, where perhaps I asked my program to fetch some information about Apple and Microsoft, and whatever this website was, well, it was something that had some information about who their CEOs were, and the just spelled out company name, and some tags about these companies. So now that I have this response, okay, how should I actually use it? How should I actually pull out individual pieces of it? Let's just think about this for a moment. So if I wanted to fetch the name of Apple's CEO, what would I write? Well, first, in this API response, I'm seeing, all right, it at first has two keys, Apple and Microsoft. So, okay, well, I do want Apple. So here we go. I haven't just zoomed into only the name of the CEO. But okay, I still have a few things in here. This is another dictionary or another JSON blob within a JSON blob. And I could continue sort of zooming in on just the piece that I want by writing another key here, CEO. And all right, cool. This will give me just the name of Apple CEO. What we're seeing in here in this particular one is that there's also some square brackets, what look like Python lists inside of here. JSON blobs use these as well. So if I wanted to see the hardware tag of Apple, then what would I write? So I'll give you guys a moment to think about it. Let's see. I'm still talking about Apple, right? The hardware tag is here. It's not under Microsoft. It is under Apple. And here's that blob coming back. I see hardware. It's under the key called tags. So let's keep going. Let's call this tags. And now what I have is a list. Well, can I just say hardware like this? I can't. So this is not quite going to work. The reason being, what I'm seeing here is a Python list, not a dictionary. It does not have key value pairs. Instead, I'm going to have to ask for things based on their location. If I wanted technology, that would be at location 0, right? These are always starting at location 0. And if I wanted hardware, okay, well, that's at location 1. There we go. So this is how I could just get hardware. So here, we're just sort of seeing how we can navigate through JSON blobs, which are just a very common format for API responses. To be sure, JSON is not the only way that APIs might format their data when they're giving us some sort of response. They may tell us some data in CSV format, in HTML, just HTML, the same way that web pages are marked up. In XML, there's plenty of file formats that APIs might give you data in, but JSON is just going to be a very common one, and we will see the use of JSON in our Twitter API. All right, so that's very convenient for us since we are dealing with Python. Okay. So now that we've got all that out of the way, I just want to show you guys what a simple API looks like. We're going to actually connect to a very simple one. This is not going to be a very sophisticated one. We're not dealing with the Twitter API yet. The Twitter API actually has quite a few rules about itself. As an example, we are going to be using the API for, let me move this over here, a webcomic called XKCD. So this is a much simpler API than the one for Twitter, but this is still an API. There is a real API for this webcomic. So here, let me paste the link that I'm at right now on my screen. So I'm just at xkcd.com/json.html. And here they're telling us how we can fetch some data. So this is a very small documentation page, right? This is the entire documentation page. Later, when we get to the Twitter one, we'll see it's it's way more than this. It's multiple pages, and each one is very long. But all right, as far as just any documentation page for an API, it might be just this simple. I mean, this is, after all, a real API. It functions, as we'll see very shortly. So in essence, all APIs are different. The one for XKCD is certainly very different than the one for Twitter. But what they all have in common is that they have rules for how they're used. So because they're all different, we don't know in advance what the Twitter API, what its rules are exactly, unless we read the documentation. And so here, I'm just going to read through this documentation. I mean, all right, it's just saying, hey, you can grab comics and some metadata with the JSON interface. Cool. That's what we just saw. It wants us to format our URLs like this. So these are the rules that we as information consumers, I'm going to call us information consumers because we're going to be requesting some information from this API. And the website will be serving as the information provider. We are asking for some data. It is giving us some data. So here it's telling us, okay, the rules for us are to format our URLs like this. These are very simple rules, really not a lot. You can either format your URL like this to grab the current comic, the most recent comic, or you can format your URL like this to grab a specific comic. Here's just their example of comic number 614. All right, sure. That's all the rules for us. So very simple, not a lot going on. What are the rules for the provider? What is it supposed to give to us? What can we expect to get back? Well, here it's telling us these files contain, in a plain text and easily parsed format, they're talking about JSON, comic titles, URLs, post dates, transcripts, and well, here they just sort of say other metadata. I guess we're not exactly sure what this is. I will say in general, some API documentation is better than others. And right, I mean, if this were not just a webcomic, I would probably be pretty dissatisfied with it just saying other metadata. I would probably want it to be a little more specific. But all right, as far as this one goes, I'm fine with that. So, okay, cool. Let me go ahead and grab one of these URLs. I'm just going to copy this. We move this out of the way. Move this out of the way. And I'm going to say, hey, this is the URL that I want. And I'm writing it in quotation marks. Writing in quotation marks, just the same way that I was writing these things in quotation marks. And in Python, we will want all of our actual text to be in quotation marks. This URL will be no different. Oops. Didn't need to create that. All right. So this is the URL that I'm going to make my Python code hit. We're hitting that endpoint. In order to be able to do this, so I'm not using Tweepy yet. I'm not using the Twitter API library that we'll be using shortly. I'm just using the built-in Python library for sending and receiving web requests around the internet. It is just called requests. And right, by request, it does not mean like, I don't know, the type of request that humans might offer to each other. But I mean web requests, HTTP requests specifically. So the kinds of requests that your browser sends to some server somewhere every time you go to a website. So I've got my URL. I've imported my library. Using this library, it's actually very simple to hit a particular endpoint. We need to send it a GET request, and then we need to open it up and look at the JSON. At least for this one, it's JSON. And we know that because we read the documentation. So here, I'm going to say requests.get. This is going to be the syntax for, and yeah, Colab, Google Colab is showing us some documentation while we're typing. It's kind of handy. It is telling us, okay, we're supposed to put a URL here. Well, all right. I created a URL earlier. I just put it right here. I named mine URL. All right. So I'm going to say request.get to that URL. It's going to give me back a response, and I'm going to store that response into a variable that I'm just calling response. Let's go ahead and run this. So far, I sent my GET request and I got a response back. We haven't actually looked at it. I mean, here you might be saying, hey, we asked to print the response. Where is the comic? where's the comic I thought we were going to grab, and the metadata? Why does it just say this? Well, we haven't actually extracted the JSON from it yet. There is one more step we need to do. All I'm doing here is I'm seeing what kind of HTTP status code this gives us. I think everyone's probably familiar with 404 codes. Perhaps you've gone to a website that doesn't exist, and you got a 404 code. Right? It says, sorry, that web page does not exist, or file not found, or something like that. I'm not going to go too in the weeds here, but as far as HTTP status codes go, 200 is good. That means everything's okay, everything worked out fine. You may also come across 300 codes, which are just for redirects. So the URL that you hit ended up redirecting you to a different location. 400 codes, which are errors on the client side, that is us, right? So when you hit a 404 code, that is a type of 400 code. The server is saying, you made a mistake. I'm sorry, you made a mistake. That thing doesn't exist. It's not my fault. It is your fault. That's what the server is really saying. And you also may come across 500 codes. These are an error on the server side. So if you do come across 500 codes, that's the server saying, sorry, you didn't do anything wrong. My bad. Something went wrong on my end. And I'll remedy it or something, whatever message it tells you. But that is an error on the server side. So all right, we got a 200 code, and I imagine you guys got a 200 code too, but I certainly got a 200 code. So everything is good. I hit the API endpoint, and I have a valid response. What do I actually do with this response? Well, we'll end up doing this a little bit differently in Tweepy. But for now, in the requests library, we're going to say response, the name of my response dot.json. This is going to give me a JSON blob. I'm just going to call mine blob, and let's print out this blob. Let's see what we end up getting. Actually, when I say print, it tries to do it all long like this. Let me take out print so that it tries to fit it all on my screen. There we go. This is a little bit easier to see. So here we go. Just by saying .json on the end here, I have extracted this JSON blob as a Python dictionary. So right now, this is a Python dictionary. I see the curly braces around here. I see the key value pairs, right? So here's my key, here's my value. All right, cool. And it does have a bunch of metadata. It has the year, month, and day where this came out. All right, looks like this is a fresh comic from just today. It has this image. Now you'll note it did not send all of the pixel data of the image, right? I mean, if it sent all the pixel data of this image, I'm not sure how big this picture is, but right, that would be a lot. And that's generally not something that we want our APIs to send around. We're trying to send this in a very concise way, right? So how big is this whole response, right? This is just plain text. This is very small. Right, this is a very small response. So it's a very small amount of data to send across the internet. That's great. And the image, right? They did include the information that we would need to get that image, but instead of sending us the red, green, and blue values for every pixel of that image, which would be a lot, they just sent us some text representing where this image lives. And I'll just click on it, and all right, here. All right, cool. We have today's XKCD comic. This is the actual image. This is what it looks like. So all right, cool. It's about logic gates. But all right, cool. This is today's XKCD comic. All right, cool. And we have the information to get it, even though when we ran this API call, when we hit that endpoint, it didn't actually send us that entire image, right? Just, I'll just say that the entire image is much bigger, even though it's not that big. I mean, right, when I clicked on it, it fit on my screen pretty nicely. It was pretty small. And it was all, black and white, not very high res or anything. But it was way bigger than just the text here. Right? Text is just, very, very small for computers to process and to pass around on the internet. So cool. We have this very concise response. And now that I have this blob, now that I have this thing, I can pull out just the parts that I want. Let's just say that I want the date. I want to know what date did this comic get released on. All right, well, I know how to grab things from a JSON blob. I can grab the day. Here, I'll ask to print this out. And I can grab the, here, I'll just do it like this, the month blob at the key called month. And I can grab the year. I guess I did day, month, year, probably not the format that you guys are used to. At least I'm in America, I'm not used to this format. All right, but cool. We can just look things up inside this blob based on their keys and get back the corresponding value. Awesome. All right. So here we've now actually used, right? We actually used a real API. It was a very simple one, sure, but we actually used a real API. We got back some response, turned it into a JSON blob. Well, it already contained one, but we just extracted that information from it, and then pulled out just the pieces of data that we wanted. All right, cool. So now let's talk about how we're going to do the same thing with. Let's talk about how we're going to do the same thing with the Twitter API. So we could call the Twitter API directly with GET requests. This is what we did with XKCD. But we're not going to do that. Some more sophisticated APIs use wrappers. And a wrapper is, well, exactly what it sounds like. It is some way of saying, okay, well, I know we're just sending GET requests, and as we'll see with Twitter post requests when we actually want to write tweets. I know we're just sending GET requests and post requests around the internet. But let's make this a little bit cleaner. Let's wrap it in here. It's wrapped in the Tweepy library and the objects therein. And these wrappers are classes. By that I just mean programmatic objects that have been written to streamline our using the API. So Tweepy, which I imported before, but here let me just write this right now in case there were anyone who joined us a little later. In Google Colab, you certainly can just say import Tweepy, import some library, and Google Colab will go ahead and fetch that library. Now, if we were doing this ourselves, I'll just mention if we were doing this ourselves. So we're not going to do this because if you are doing this yourself, you have to wait like about a week for Twitter to get back to you. But we would end up creating a developer account on Twitter, not just a normal human account, but a developer account. That's what Twitter calls these. And then we would have to get approved by Twitter. So this is the part where we would wait around for a week. We're not. I'm going to be giving you guys my API key and private key, as long as you guys promise not to post 50,000 tweets, or whatever the record cap is. But anyway, so we would have to sign up, wait around for a week. then if we were not doing this in Google Colab, if you guys were trying to do this on your own machines, on just your local machines, we would have to install this library, this library Tweepy, unless we wanted to, just use the request library, which would work, but Tweepy is just going to streamline things for us. And then after signing up, waiting around a week and downloading this thing, then we would be ready to actually authenticate ourselves and write some code. So I've already done steps 1 through 3 for us. Well, Google Colab did step 3, but I've already done those first steps. So let's just go ahead and get into how this thing is going to work. So first, I want to mention the documentation. So same thing we did with XKCD, same thing we did before. We don't know how the API works. We have not seen this API before. And all APIs are different. So how do we actually use it? Well, here I have this page pulled up. So here, let me send this page to you guys in the Zoom chat. So this page is telling us, okay, how, what does the JSON actually look like when we try to interact with this API? And here they're showing us what we can expect from this API's responses. So this is, for example, I believe a response for fetching a tweet. Here we have some information, some keys, right? This structure hopefully looks familiar. This is the same structure that we saw before. We've got curly braces on the outsides. We've got keys with a colon, then their corresponding value, which are comma separated from one another. All right, cool. We've got when it was created, its unique identifier, the actual text. The actual text is probably what we're most interested in, though there's plenty of other pieces of information we might want to fetch. The name of the user, or the screen name of the user. Well, I guess the place information is missing here. This is just an empty dictionary. All right, if it had any hashtags, if it had URLs, I guess this one does have a URL. All right, cool. So here we're just getting a sense of what we should expect from these API endpoints. That's not all. That's not all I want to mention. I'll also mention something new with the XKCD API. We could only fetch data. We could only ask to look at data. With the Twitter API, we are also going to post data. So in HTTP, there are GET requests and there are POST requests. There are a few more, but GET and POST are probably covering the main bases. And if we want to actually send a tweet, if we want to write a tweet, we're going to go ahead and use POST. And here it's just showing us all the different API endpoints, though for us, we don't have to worry about reading through these and typing them out because we're using Tweepy. So for us, this is actually going to look more like this. So here we go. Let me copy and paste this too into the Zoom chat there. This is the documentation page, not on just the Twitter API in general, but specifically on Tweepy. And this is our wrapper. This is our wrapper. Now it tells us a lot of things. This page is very extensive. I'm certainly not going to read through this whole thing for you guys. I think that would be very boring and probably not all that helpful. But let's just see what this is going to actually look like. I think you guys are perfectly capable of reading through this on your own time. But let's see what we can actually do. So I already have some authentication information. We're going to need this. So here we go. let me paste these very long, unique tokens into the chat, as long as everyone promises not to spam a bunch of tweets through the bot. All right. So I just sent you guys that I know in the Zoom chat, it just looks like a bunch of gobbledygook, but it is just these 2 lines. Well, I guess 3. I think I did write this one as well, but right, it's supposed to be just these 2 lines. Let's see. Someone asked if we are following with our credentials, which are they exactly? Yeah, so if you're following with your credentials, let me pull up my documentation here. It is, so this, what I set as the access token, this is the access token and secret. Let me write this down. So here, yeah, when we call set access token, this is the access token and the secret access token. And then on that first line, so if anyone did already do this with their own own credentials, here, auth handler, this is the bearer token and secret bearer token. So for anyone curious, why are there 2 of everything? One is the public token. Essentially, you can think of that as your username. So it's the one that the Twitter API recognizes and says, oh yeah, that's public information. Sure, that's fine. Not really a big deal to leak that out. But this second one, this is your secret token, effectively your password. Right, so these are what we should really keep hidden, what should only be for us. Of course, I'm sharing this one with you guys. But all right, cool. This is how it's going to work. This is how it's going to work. So these are very just long looking hashes of things. But all right, if you did not in advance create your own developer account, you'll just want to go ahead and use these. So I'll just go ahead and run this. And all right, so I imported Tweepia and I ran this. I'm not getting any errors. Okay, cool. Let's just see how to do some basic things with our code here, with our what is effectively going to be a bot. So probably the most basic thing to do, sort of the hello world of interacting with this API, would be to see our timeline. So here, let's just see our timeline. I'm just going to call. So here I need one more line. Sorry, I just pasted those 2 lines because those 2 were the ones that had all that important information there. Please don't share those. We're going to actually create an instance of our API wrapper. This is going to be done by writing tweepy.api and passing our authentication handler in here. I have just named mine auth. Oops, I did not mean to scroll way up here. There we go. And I'm just going to store this in a variable called API so that I can say API.this and API.that later on. All right, now let me rerun this. There we go. I reran it, and now the name of my particular instance of my wrapper is just API. I just called it API. That seemed suitable. Now let's actually view the timeline. I'm going to say API.home_timeline with a pair of parentheses at the end. And if I hit run here, we're just going to see a bunch of stuff. Whoa, look at all this. This is not very pretty. This is, maybe our computer can make sense of this, but I don't know about you, but I am not having a good time reading this. Right? This is a lot. This is a lot of information that I don't really need. But hey, what format is it? So, okay, sure, they have some other stuff, but then, here, they're telling us they have some JSON for us. And here, it looks like the same format that we saw when we looked at the documentation page. Key created at with a value for when it was created at, some unique IDs, et cetera, et cetera. Well, maybe I want to read through here and I just want to see the text of each of these tweets. So here, this is my timeline. This is, I think, about 20 tweets. The documentation would tell us exactly if we didn't feel like counting how many there are. But what we have for each of these, we can ask for its JSON in a slightly different way than before. Or when we were doing this with the request library, we would say name of the response dot JSON parentheses. Here, we just use this a little bit differently. Or actually here, this is, I'm trying to do it across all of these. Each one of these, this is actually a list. And we can see that with the square bracket at the very beginning. And if I scrolled way out, or well, I can't find it right now, but somewhere there's a bracket way at the end there. So I'm actually gonna loop through this whole thing. If you're not familiar with for loops, no worries. So I'm gonna loop through all of these. Maybe I'll comment that out so I don't grab it twice. I'm just going to call each one of those individually tweet. And inside of here, I do have tweet dot underscore JSON. Once I've got just the JSON, I can, or actually, I think this is going to be, I think I'm doing this right. Yeah, there we go. Here I have just the JSON. And now we can look this up. One of these keys was text. I saw this in the, oh, there it is. It's also right here. Let's just print the text of each of the tweets on my timeline. And here we go. I think I just made this account follow Elon Musk and Rihanna. So here we go. All right, we have a bunch of tweets from Elon Musk and Rihanna. I did not ask it to also print which user is which, so you know, I guess you guys can probably guess which ones are which. But all right, here we go. We are just seeing the text for each of these tweets. I think it would be kind of fun to make this bot actually send some tweets in an automated sort of way. So right now, so far, all we've done is we grab the timeline, then we iterated over each of the individual tweets in the timeline and printed out the text. So that's really all I did here. Iterate over each tweet in the timeline, printing out its text. The text, that's all we printed out, right? There was all that other information in the JSON, but here I'm just asking for the text. Let me go ahead and I'm gonna paste this to you guys in the Zoom chat. I hope this comes out all right. I know the Zoom chat makes things kind of funky, but here I just wrote a little Python function called pig-latinify. So this function will take a sentence and return the pig Latin version of that sentence. So this is a pretty simple Python function. I guess this is, this probably looks like a lot of code, but we don't actually have to know how to read this thing. I just want to show you that this will, turn, hello, this is a sentence. This will turn it into pig Latin. Why not? I think it could be kind of fun to have a bot that reads tweets from our timeline and ends up sending out its own tweets of those same tweets, but in pig Latin. Why not? So here I have a bunch of these. Let me just grab one of them. So here, let's just say this is one tweet, or here I was asking to print it. One tweet from our whatchamacallit, and all right, from our feed. Here it is, just this tweet. I guess maybe a little morbid, but all right. Let's see if we can't pig Latinify this text. So I'm just going to call pig Latinify on one tweet. Let's go ahead and hit run. And there we go. I did make it, get rid of any links. So that link that was in there is gone. But all right. Here, I just used this little Python function to turn this into pig Latin. If we want to make our bot send a tweet, so here this is now my tweet. This is a tweet that I want to make my bot send. We can do this by calling. So let's actually send a tweet. Now, I've already looked at the documentation, so I already know that I'm supposed to call update_status. So this is how we can actually send a tweet. And in the parentheses here, I'm just going to say status equals my tweet. Let's hit run and see what happens. So all right, all we get back is this JSON. But what actually happened, that's right, I didn't actually give you guys the Twitter page yet. Let me just paste the Twitter page that if anyone has sent out tweets, this is the page. This is the page where your tweets will end up going. I just sent the link here in the Zoom chat. And hey, 21 seconds ago, I wrote this tweet. I wrote this, just this little pig Latin version of that Elon Musk tweet. All right, cool. That's it. That's my bot there. So maybe you guys are not interested necessarily in making a bot that prints out pig Latin, but that's okay. We now have, at our fingertips, we now have, the entirety of Python. And I know some of you know Python already, but if you don't, maybe this is a nice reason to start picking it up. We now have at our fingertips a way to programmatically make this bot interact with Twitter. I guess I should probably mention one last thing that I have not done yet, which is just how we could look up a specific user. So far, I know the documentation is very extensive and it's got a ton of things you could do. But so far, all I've done is grabbed the tweets from my timeline and then updated my status, which, I just made it a pig Latin sentence. But one thing that is just probably very common that you might want to do is let's actually look up a Twitter user. So here, I'm going to say api.get_user. And here I can put a screen name. I'm just going to, I don't know, I'm going to put SpaceX here. I think that's probably a safe option. This is some user that I want to look up. So I'm going to store the API response in a variable called user. And then let's look at the JSON. And here we go. Now, this is a very large JSON blob. Wow, there's a lot here. There's a lot here, but right, it is all just plain text. It is all just plain text. Whoop, I want to scroll up higher. How do I get there? There we go. I probably scrolled down too far. So just a plain text JSON blob with those curly braces around it, and with any of these, right? And so we could look at particular things that we might want. Hey, maybe I'll just pull out the description. Let's just look at the description and hit run. And all right, here we go. This is just the description on the SpaceX Twitter page. All right, cool. So with just knowing how to navigate Python dictionaries, And right, if you are doing this on your own, to actually sign up for a developer account and wait for Twitter to actually get back to you and say, oh, okay, here's your credentials, and a little bit of knowing how to use an API, whether or not this is just a raw API or one inside a library. Right here, we were using the Tweepy library. All right, cool. We've got a way to write a bot. Of course, we were just doing this with Twitter, but I'm sure if you guys wanted to do the same thing for some different website that has an API, right? Certainly not all websites have APIs, but another website that does have some documentation and an API, right? A programmable interface for interacting with that site. Cool, you've got the tools to do it. Of course, a different website would have a different API, different rules for how you're supposed to interact with it. If any do have their own wrappers, right? They would not use the Tweepy library. They would use their own, whatever they've named theirs. And all right, cool. We do have with just a little bit of code. I know here probably the most code I used was just for making something Pig Latin. But all right, cool. We've got our ways to actually write our own bot. All right, then yeah, thanks everyone for showing up. I'm glad you guys got something out of this.